Pope Francis tells Americans to vote their consciences. How does one do that? And what does the church mean by conscience? This is Ray from Louisiana. This is a great question because, again, that whole idea of, some of us, I think, are unconscious in general to what's going on in the world. But, when we're supposed to vote our consciences, what do we mean by that? Is that how I feel about it? How my friends feel about it? How does one go about forming their conscience? And what do we mean by conscience?
Right. The document that I just referred to by the bishops, it's called the Bishop's Voters Guide 2016. The actual subtitle of that document is called Forming Conscience, right? And so the idea here is the bishops are going to give us some general guidelines on how to form our conscience. And this document is split into three parts. The first part is very nice. It's kind of gives you the general context in which parts 2 and 3 are going to come. But you could easily skip down to part 2, and that discusses basically 10 major issues. And again, these issues are prioritized. And so as the bishops talk about it, the first thing they talk about is the right to life and why that's the first thing, the first priority, why it is the preeminent threat to culture and preeminent threat to all individual rights. And it goes through and speaks about that very, very much. It goes through then and talks about the promotion of peace as a secondary issue. It talks then about the third area, which speaks about what's called the protection of marriage, precisely the protection of the understanding of marriage as between one man and one woman with the intention to be permanent and exclusive, within the family, which is the building block of society. So it goes through. That's the third issue. The fourth issue gets into the whole area of religious liberty, which is an exceedingly important issue, and then issues of migration and so forth. Then if you go down to the third part, what the bishops do for you is they really, in bullet points, literally, in about 10 bullet points, they give you a sort of a set of policies to be pursued. They tell you that it is not equally weighted, therefore they're giving it to you in an implicit priority, and they're telling you that some of these things are intrinsic evils. Let's just quickly go through some of those things so you get what the bishops are trying to say is important for forming your conscience. So let me just quickly go through the bullets. The number one bullet is called the protection of the most innocent in our culture, namely unborn human beings. And of course, right there we get the intrinsic evil of abortion, which they call the preeminent requirement. So there's no question this is the first priority in the formation of conscience, which must be considered because the sin that we're speaking about, both individually and culturally, that sin is so fundamental, it's against an innocent, it is so heinous, and it literally undermines all other rights in the process. And the bishops are very careful to specify that as an intrinsic evil. The second thing they talk about is the avoidance of violence. And what they're talking about in the avoidance of violence, they give a series of issues in this order. Number one, they're saying you should never make an appeal to violence in order to solve a social problem. So the number one thing is it's inexcusable to have 1 million abortions a year to resolve a problem of unwanted pregnancies. There has to be something else, but our second priority is you cannot do this. They then include other things. They say, secondly, you cannot appeal to assisted suicide as an adequate means of dealing with the challenges of sickness or elderliness. The third area that they deal with is you can't destroy embryos, for experimentation or other purposes. These are human lives. The fourth thing that they appeal to is capital punishment, that you cannot appeal, you can't kill a person capitally if there's no protection that comes from it. And finally, the last thing is that we have to be very careful about the kinds of wars that we deal with. But again, notice that there is that interior prioritization of the issues. The third issue that the bishops talk about, this is a policy issue in a document where priority is important, as they speak to the whole issue of the definition of the understanding of marriage. And so they're saying, look, the family is the building block of society. You have to observe, the complementarity of the sexes, and you cannot allow yourself to be, as it were, undermined by gender ideologies which claim that gender difference is not important. A marriage is contracted with exclusivity and with the intention of permanence, or what's called indissolubility. It is contracted by one man and by one woman for the purposes of creating a family, which family is the building block of society. Couldn't be more clear. We should protect that understanding of family within the society. The fourth area that the bishops get into is the whole area of religious liberty, but in the process they talk also about our need to make sure that people have a proper means of support. So you can't. What the bishops are trying to say, as a fourth and fifth issue, is we have to deal with poverty, and we have to deal especially with poverty of families and of children, and we have to do what we can to make sure that there are means possible for children and for families to live adequately. And then in light of that, that we also have to pursue health care policies to make sure that we provide adequate health care to every single person who needs it. And when doing so, those health care policies must protect the right to life, must protect the right of human dignity, and must protect religious liberty. So we can't have health care policies that are going to be coercive or intrusive into the religious liberties of people, which are, obviously within the bounds of any societal acceptance, and by the way, proven by precedent. So that would be another area. The migration and immigration area is exceedingly important to the bishops to make sure, and I might have gypped immigration, it might have been one notch higher as a policy, and they say that it must, we must provide an adequate and just pathway to citizenship. We must treat migrants fairly, and we must make sure that they have, their needs met, even though they may be, whatever way they happen to be in this country, the fact that they're here, we must take care of them. It's part of our Christian duty. And then they go on to describe other areas which are more generic, about promoting good stewardship of creation and peace and things of this nature. But essentially, it's very, very clear how the bishops see their the priorities of policy within that document. And it's just worth, just to inform your conscience, Ray, the main thing you want to do is just go to that document, zoom down to part 3, take 15 minutes and try to thoughtfully go through these things, thoughtfully go through how the bishops prioritize them, thoughtfully go through what they mean by preeminence of an issue, thoughtfully go through what they mean by an intrinsic evil. And I think you'll get a pretty good sense of at least how the bishops see it in 2016.